It was one of those evenings that should have felt ordinary, but didn't. The low hum of the television played in the background, a crime drama Sarah had insisted on, but wasn't really watching. She sat on the far end of the couch, her legs curled up beneath her, tapping away on her phone. I glanced at her briefly, noting the slight furrow in her brow. Something about her posture felt off, but I shrugged it off and returned to my emails. "Michael," she said suddenly. The tone of her voice caught me off guard. It wasn't her usual casual call for attention. It was sharper, deliberate. "Yeah," I replied, putting my phone down. She didn't meet my eyes right away. Instead, she kept scrolling on her phone as if deciding how to start. Then she looked up, her lips curling into a smile that didn't match her eyes. "We need to talk," a phrase that instantly put me on edge. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting up straighter. She tilted her head, almost as if she were amused by my concern. "You know," she began, her voice light, but laced with something bitter. "It's amazing how oblivious you can be sometimes." "Oblivious about what?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "Those business trips I've been going on? With your little brother James?" "Yeah," I said, the confusion clear in my voice. "They weren't for work," she said, the words dropping like a hammer. "They were our little romantic honeymoons." At first, I thought she was joking. My mind scrambled to process the absurdity of what she'd just said. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice tight, barely above a whisper. She let out a laugh, not a nervous laugh, but one filled with derision. "Don't act so shocked, Michael. You've been blind for years. James has been satisfying me better in a week than you have in our entire marriage." I stared at her, the words hanging in the air like a bomb that had just detonated but hadn't fully hit yet. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice growing louder. "Tell me you're not serious." "Dead serious," she said, leaning back against the couch. "And honestly, it's a relief to finally get it out in the open. Hiding it from you was becoming a chore." Before I could even respond, James walked into the room, holding a beer like he owned the place. He was wearing that same cocky grin he always had, the one I'd ignored for years because, well, he was my younger brother. "What's up, big bro?" he said casually, plopping down on the armchair across from me. "You're kidding me," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell me this is some twisted joke." James chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, man, it's not a joke. Sarah deserves better, and so do I. And you? You were too busy playing the perfect husband to even notice." My hands clenched into fists. "You're telling me that you, my brother, and my wife—" "Relax," James interrupted, taking a long swig of his beer. "You'll live. Relax," I repeated, my voice rising. "You want me to relax after you?" Sarah cut me off. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Michael. You're acting like this is the end of the world. It happens. People fall out of love." "Out of love?" I said, my voice breaking. "You didn't fall out of love. You cheated. You lied. You betrayed me." James shrugged. "Look, man, you weren't exactly making her happy. Someone had to step in." I couldn't believe the audacity. "You're unbelievable. Both of you. You think you're the heroes here." Sarah smirked, her eyes glinting with something sinister. "And here's the cherry on top," she said, her tone mockingly sweet. "I'm pregnant, and it's James's baby." The words hit me like a freight train. My mind raced, my chest tightened. "What?" I whispered, though I'd heard her clearly. "We're moving to London," she said nonchalantly, "to start our new life together." "London?" I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" James leaned back in the chair, smirking. "Oh, didn't she tell you? Mom and Dad are in on it. They're thrilled, actually. So thrilled, they paid for our plane tickets." I stared at him, feeling my stomach churn. "My parents, the people who raised me, they knew?" "You're lying," I said, my voice barely audible. "Nope," James said, popping the pea like he was savoring it. "They've been super supportive. They think Sarah and I make a great couple. Better than you and her ever were." The room began to spin. My legs felt weak, even though I was sitting. The weight of their words pressed down on me, suffocating, crushing. "You're all insane," I finally managed to say. James smirked again, leaning forward this time. Honestly, you should thank me. I'm giving her the life you never could. Maybe one day, I'll let you visit your niece or nephew. That was it. The tipping point. I stood up so fast the coffee table between us rattled. Get out, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Oh, come on, Michael, Sarah said, rolling her eyes. Don't be so childish. We're just telling you the truth. The truth. I roared, slamming my fist on the table. You think this is some noble act? You think betraying your husband and sleeping with his brother is something you can just walk away from? James stood up too, his smug grin fading slightly. Careful, bro, he said, his tone suddenly defensive. You don't want to make things worse for yourself. Worse? I said, taking a step toward him. You think this can get worse? Sarah stepped between us, her hand on James's chest. Let it go, Michael. You can't win here. Just accept it and move on. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Move on? You think I'm just going to let you two walk away after this? You don't have a choice, James said, regaining his composure. We're leaving, and there's nothing you can do about it. I looked at them both, my wife and my brother, standing side by side like some twisted power couple. My heart ached, my mind reeled, but somewhere beneath the pain, a spark ignited. You're right, I said after a long pause. My voice was eerily calm now. There's nothing I can do to stop you from leaving. James smirked, but Sarah hesitated, narrowing her eyes at me. But you'd better believe, I continued, stepping closer to them. There's plenty I can do to make you regret ever crossing me. For the first time, James's cocky facade wavered. Watch your back, I said, my voice low and steady. Both of you. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them behind. My chest heaved, my fists still clenched, but my mind was already racing. This wasn't over. Far from it. That night, sleep was out of the question. I sat in my car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The occasional burst of laughter echoed from the guest room where Sarah and James were staying, rubbing salt into a wound they thought would fester forever. The betrayal wasn't just theirs. It was a family-wide conspiracy. My parents, the people who were supposed to have my back, were part of this twisted scheme. Sarah's smug face, James's arrogant laugh, my parents' silent approval. They played on a loop in my mind. My breathing was shallow, my heart pounding like a war drum. But I wasn't going to break. No, they had no idea who they were dealing with. If they think I'm going to sit back and watch them destroy my life, I muttered to myself, they're in for a surprise. I stepped out of the car and lit a cigarette, something I hadn't done in years. The smoke curled into the cold night air as I leaned against the hood, formulating my plan. This wouldn't just be revenge. It would be an obliteration, a precise, calculated dismantling of everything they held dear. They wanted to laugh now? Fine. I'll make sure they cried later. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Sarah was at the counter, stirring her coffee, while James lounged at the table, scrolling through his phone. The audacity of him sitting there, acting like he owned the place, made my blood boil. But I kept my face neutral. Morning, I said, my voice flat. Sarah glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Morning, she replied curtly. James didn't even look up. What's up, bro? He said casually. I bit back the urge to slam his head into the table. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. Nothing much, I said, sipping the coffee like it wasn't taking everything in me to stay calm. Just figuring out what's next. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What's next? Yeah, I said, leaning back in my chair. I mean, you two have made your plans pretty clear. No point fighting it, right? James smirked. Glad you're finally seeing reason. Oh, I see reason all right, I said, forcing a smile. I see it loud and clear. Sarah exchanged a quick glance with James, suspicion flickering in her eyes. But she didn't press the issue. I played the role of the defeated husband perfectly over the next week. I didn't confront my parents, didn't yell or argue with Sarah or James. Instead, I quietly started digging. Sarah had never been good with technology. Her phone password was still my birthday, a bitter irony I used to my advantage. Late one night, while she and James were asleep, I unlocked her phone and combed through her messages. There it was. Everything I needed. Pictures of the two of them together, texts mocking me, and even bank transfers to James from a joint account I shared with Sarah. She'd been funneling money to him for months. Gotcha, I muttered under my breath, forwarding everything to my own email. The next step was my parents. I visited them under the pretense of needing advice. My mother welcomed me with open arms, her smile as warm as ever. It made me sick. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm managing," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I just wanted to ask for your guidance. You've always been so wise about these things." Her face lit up with pride. "Of course, Michael. Anything for you." Over tea, I steered the conversation toward finances, subtly probing about their accounts and investments. My father, ever the braggart, let slip about a sizable trust fund they'd set up for James. "James is the baby of the family," he said with a laugh. "We just want to make sure he's set for life." "Of course," I said, smiling tightly. "That makes sense." Inside, I was seething. Over the next month, I methodically laid the groundwork for their downfall. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into James's activities. The results were a gold mine. Unpaid debts, a trail of flings beside Sarah, and shady business dealings that could land him in serious legal trouble. I also started siphoning money from the joint account Sarah thought she was so cleverly using. Bit by bit, I moved funds into a private account she couldn't touch. By the time she noticed, it would be too late. Then there were my parents. I found out their trust fund for James wasn't just generous, it was recklessly managed. A few well-placed anonymous tips to their financial advisor, combined with some strategic withdrawals, set their investments on a path to collapse. Patience, I told myself every night as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Patience. One evening, as we all sat in the living room, Sarah casually mentioned their upcoming move to London. "We've been looking at flats," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Found a gorgeous one in Kensington." "Kensington?" I repeated, feigning interest. "That sounds expensive." "It is," James said, flashing his trademark grin. "But we've got it covered, don't we, babe?" "Thanks to your parents," Sarah added, throwing a glance my way. I nodded slowly, pretending to absorb the information. "That's great. I'm happy for you guys." James tilted his head, studying me. "You're taking this surprisingly well." "What can I say?" I replied with a shrug. "You've convinced me. You're the better man for her." Sarah smiled smugly. "Finally, you're starting to get it." I smiled back, my heart pounding in anticipation. They had no idea the storm that was coming. The next day, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer to finalize my divorce strategy. With the evidence I had collected, Sarah's infidelity, the financial misconduct, James's shady dealings, I had an airtight case. That evening, as Sarah and James lounged in the living room, I stood in the doorway, watching them. "Enjoying yourselves?" I asked, my tone light. James looked up, smirking. "Always." "Good," I said, my smile widening. "Because it's all downhill from here." For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in Sarah's eyes. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to wonder. The pieces were in place. Now all that was left was to watch it all come crashing down. The morning began with chaos. I was in the kitchen, calmly sipping coffee, when Sarah stormed in, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her face was pale, a stark contrast to the rage in her voice. "What the hell is this?" she shouted, slamming her phone onto the counter. I glanced at her, deliberately slow, and took another sip of my coffee. "What's what?" "My cards are declined. Our accounts are frozen. Overdraft notifications are blowing up my phone." "What did you do?" Feigning concern, I put down my cup. "Oh, didn't I mention? I filed for divorce yesterday. Adultery voids any claim to our finances. You're not entitled to a dime." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, she was speechless. Then came the explosion. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice breaking. "You don't get to ruin my life just because you're bitter." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "Ruin your life?" "Sarah, you did that to yourself when you decided to crawl into bed with my brother. This isn't revenge. This is consequences. She paced the kitchen, her anger spilling over into incoherent muttering. You're a pathetic excuse for a man. You think you're punishing me? James, and I don't need your money. We're starting fresh. I raised an eyebrow. Starting fresh? With what? James's charm? Good luck with that. At that moment, James strolled in, rubbing his eyes and yawning. What's all the yelling about? Sarah rounded on him. Your brother froze our accounts. We have nothing. James blinked, confused, before turning to me. What the hell, man? Are you serious? I shrugged. Dead serious. Oh, and you might want to check your phone. I think your boss tried calling. James frowned and pulled out his phone. His expression darkened as he read through the messages. You tipped them off, didn't you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. Do you know what you've done? James's voice rose as he stepped closer. I lost my job because of you. Because of me? I said, standing up. No, James. You lost your job because you're a liability. Maybe next time, don't show up to work high. His face twisted in anger. You think you're so clever, don't you? What's your plan here, huh? Make us miserable so you can feel better about yourself. I stared him down, unflinching. My plan? Oh, James, we're just getting started. By noon, Sarah had spent hours on the phone trying to figure out a way around the frozen accounts. Each call ended with more frustration. I could hear snippets of her conversations, pleading with banks, yelling at customer service reps, and finally calling my parents. They won't even let me withdraw my own money, she cried into the phone. Can't you do something? I smirked to myself. My lawyer had ensured every step was airtight. Sarah had no access to our finances unless I allowed it, and I wasn't about to. Meanwhile, James was dealing with his own mess. He paced the backyard, phone pressed to his ear as he argued with his now former employer. You can't fire me over rumors, he shouted. There's no proof. I watched from the window, savoring the sight of him unraveling. He hung up, threw his phone onto the grass, and kicked the fence in frustration. What's the matter, James? I called out. Having a bad day? He spun around, glaring at me. You're a petty little bastard, you know that? I leaned against the doorframe. Petty? Maybe. But I'm also thorough. You might want to check your email. I think your landlord has something to say about your unpaid rent. James stormed inside, shoving past me. You're going to regret this, Michael. I followed him, my voice calm and measured. Regret? No, James. Regret is what you'll feel when you're evicted, or when you realize Sarah's credit is tanking as we speak. But me? I feel liberated. That evening, Sarah cornered me in the living room. She was visibly shaken, her earlier bravado replaced with desperation. Michael, she said, her tone softer than it had been all day. I didn't look up from the book I was pretending to read. Yes. Can we talk? Please. I closed the book slowly, meeting her eyes. I'm listening. She sat down across from me, wringing her hands. This doesn't have to be ugly. I know you're angry, and I don't blame you. But we can work something out. For old time's sake. For old time's sake? I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. You mean the times when you lied to my face? When you made a mockery of our marriage? She flinched. I made a mistake. I see that now. But we were happy once. Can't we find a way to move past this? I leaned forward, my voice cold and steady. Sarah, the only thing I'm moving past is you. You chose James. You chose betrayal. Now you get to live with that choice. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't budge. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She whispered. I stood up, looking down at her. No, Sarah, I'm not enjoying it. But I'll admit, watching you finally face the consequences of your actions, that's satisfying. The next day, James's world crumbled further. His landlord, fed up with the unpaid rent and the complaints from neighbors about noise, issued an eviction notice. James slammed the paper onto the kitchen counter. This is your fault, he shouted at me. Did I tell you not to pay your rent? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You tipped them off. I might have mentioned it in passing, I said with a shrug. He lunged at me, but I sidestepped easily. Careful, James. Assault won't look good on your record. Not that it matters much anymore. Sarah stepped between us, her voice trembling. Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping. James pointed a finger at me. He started this? I smirked. No, James. You started this the moment you decided to betray me. I'm just finishing it. The tension in the house became unbearable. Sarah and James argued constantly, their once flirty dynamic replaced with blame and resentment. This is all your fault, Sarah yelled one night. You were supposed to take care of us. I lost my job because of him. James shot back, gesturing toward me. What do you expect me to do? Be a man for once. I watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Trouble in paradise? Sarah turned on me, her eyes blazing. Are you happy now? Not yet, I said, walking away. With their financial stability shattered and their relationship on the rocks, I knew it was time for the next phase of my plan. But as I sat in my study that night, mapping out my next move, I realized something. They were already destroying each other. Their betrayal had united them against me. But now that their lives were crumbling, they were turning on each other. All I had to do was sit back and watch the fireworks. Still, I couldn't resist one last jab. The following morning, I left an envelope on the kitchen counter, addressed to Sarah and James. Inside was a single note, welcome to Rock Bottom. Enjoy your stay. It didn't take long for the news to reach my parents. The property they had so proudly gifted me years ago was now gone, sold to the highest bidder. What they didn't know was that I had funneled every cent from the sale into my escalating campaign against Sarah and James. The first call came late in the evening. My mother's voice trembled on the other end of the line. Michael, what have you done? She cried, her words rushing out in panic. I leaned back in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear. What I should have done a long time ago, Mom. Your betrayal has consequences. You sold the house, she continued, as if saying it aloud would make it less real. How could you do this? That property was meant to stay in the family. I smirked, though she couldn't see it. Oh, I think the family's already done a fine job of tearing itself apart. Consider this my contribution. Her voice grew louder, more desperate. You're being cruel, Michael. We're your parents. I let out a bitter laugh. Parents? Is that what you call throwing your support behind Sarah and James after what they did to me? You didn't just pick a side. You chose them over your own son. So, spare me the guilt trip. There was silence for a moment before my father got on the line. His tone was harsher, laced with anger. Michael, you need to stop this nonsense right now, he barked. You're acting like a child. A child? I repeated, my voice low and cold. Funny, coming from the man who played mediator for an affair. Did you think I wouldn't find out you paid for their plane tickets? That you encouraged them? We just wanted them to be happy. He shot back. We didn't mean for things to get this bad. Happy. My voice rose, uncharacteristically loud. You wanted them to be happy at my expense. And now you're upset because your plans didn't work out? Don't make me laugh. Michael, my mother cut in, her tone pleading. Please, we can fix this. Just give us some time. Don't take everything away. Fix this? I repeated mockingly. There's no fixing this, Mom. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Before either of them could respond, I ended the call. The next few days were eerily quiet. I knew my parents were scrambling. Their finances had been hanging by a thread for years, and the sale of the property had cut their safety net clean in half. But I wasn't done. I hired an investigator to uncover every skeleton in their financial closet. Loans they hadn't disclosed. Credit cards maxed out under my father's name. A mortgage they had refinanced one too many times. Once I had the details, I made anonymous calls to their creditors, highlighting every mispayment, every overdue bill. The pressure mounted quickly. My parents began leaving frantic voicemails. Michael, you need to call us back, my father said in one. His usual commanding tone was replaced by desperation. We can't keep up with these payments. We need your help. Another from my mother was tearful, nearly incoherent. Please, Michael. We're sorry. We never should have gotten involved. Just call us back. Please. I ignored them all. A week later, they showed up unannounced. I was in the middle of packing up some boxes to move to my new apartment when I heard the furious knock at the door. Opening it, I found my mother and father standing there. My mother looked pale, her eyes red from crying, while my father wore a mask of barely concealed anger. Michael, my mother started, stepping forward, we need to talk. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. What could we possibly have to talk about? You've gone too far, my father said, his voice tense. You've made your point. Now stop this madness. Madness. I repeated with a hollow laugh. You think this is madness? No, Dad. Madness was what you did when you helped Sarah and James stab me in the back. Madness is thinking you could betray your son and still expect his support. We didn't mean for things to go this far, my mother pleaded, clutching her hands together. We just thought they deserved a chance to be happy. Did it ever occur to you, I said, my voice growing sharper, that I deserved that chance too? Or was my happiness expendable? My father tried to step in. You're twisting this into something it's not. We didn't want to hurt you. But I cut him off, my anger boiling over. But you did. You chose to hurt me. You chose to support an affair, to smile in my face while you plotted against me. So don't stand here and act like you're the victims. My mother broke into sobs, but I didn't waver. My father, however, wasn't ready to back down. This isn't just about you, Michael, he snapped. You're destroying this family. I stepped closer, my voice icy. The family was destroyed the moment you sided with my cheating wife and brother. I'm just making sure the pieces don't come back together. There was a tense silence before I finally added, if you're looking for help, maybe you should ask Sarah and James. After all, you did everything to ensure their happiness. Let's see how much they'll sacrifice for yours. I slammed the door in their faces before they could respond. Word spread quickly through the extended family. My parents, desperate and humiliated, started calling relatives to plead for support. Some helped, but most saw through their excuses. At one point, my cousin called me to ask about the situation. Michael, your parents are saying you're out of control. What's going on? I didn't mince words. They betrayed me. They supported Sarah and James's affair and thought I'd just roll over and accept it. I'm making sure they understand what betrayal feels like. They're not getting much sympathy, my cousin admitted. Even Aunt Clara said they deserve what's coming to them. Hearing that brought a grim sense of satisfaction. A month later, my parents hit rock bottom. Their house, the one they had fought so hard to hold on to, went into foreclosure. The shame was palpable. They stopped answering calls from relatives, retreating into the shadows of their own making. One night, I received a final voicemail from my mother. Michael, we've lost everything. I don't know what to do anymore. Please, if there's any part of you that still loves us, call me back. We're sorry. We're so sorry. I listened to it twice before deleting it. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about justice, and justice had been served. By the time Sarah and James turned to me, their world had crumbled. The polished veneer they had flaunted just weeks ago had shattered, revealing nothing but desperation beneath. Their plan moved to London? A pipe dream. Their finances? Non-existent. Their support system? Gone. And now, they were standing on my doorstep, hoping to scrape together what was left of their pride. It was a rainy evening when I first heard the knock. I had just poured myself a glass of whiskey, settling in for another quiet night of watching their lives unravel from a distance. When I opened the door, there they were, Sarah with red, swollen eyes, and James, his shoulders hunched like a defeated boxer after a brutal match. Michael, Sarah began, her voice trembling as she hugged her coat tighter against the cold. We need to talk. I leaned against the doorframe, taking a slow sip of my drink before responding. Talk, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Funny, you didn't seem too interested in talking when you were tearing my life apart. James stepped forward, hands raised as if to calm me. Look, man, we screwed up. I know that now. I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. Screwed up? I repeated. Is that what you call destroying a marriage? Stabbing your own brother in the back and dragging my parents into the mess? Please, Sarah cut in, her voice cracking. We were wrong. We made a mistake. We were caught up in something stupid. But we've lost everything, Michael. We need your help. The audacity of her plea was almost laughable. I stepped back, crossing my arms as I stared them down. Help? I echoed, my voice cold. You want my help? After everything you've done? Why don't you ask my parents? Oh, wait, they're just as broke and miserable as you are. Sarah's bottom lip quivered, and before I could process what was happening, she dropped to her knees on the wet porch. I'm begging you, Michael, she sobbed. I'll do anything. Just don't leave us like this. Don't let our child suffer because of our mistakes. Her words ignited a fire in my chest. Your child? I snapped, my voice rising. You mean the one you conceived with my brother while I was working to give you the life you wanted? Don't you dare use that child as an excuse. James, who had been silent, finally spoke up. Bro, please. I was an idiot, okay? I see that now. I've lost my job, my friends, everything. Just give us a chance to fix this. I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, humorless sound. Fix this? I said, shaking my head. You think this is something you can just fix? Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every ounce of trust one ever had in you. You destroyed our family. James's face fell, his bravado crumbling. I know, man. I know. But you're my brother. We're family. That has to count for something, right? Family? I spat, my anger boiling over. Don't you dare use that word with me. Family doesn't do what you did. Family doesn't sleep with your wife and laugh about it behind your back. Sarah reached out, grabbing the hem of my jeans as she cried. Michael, I was selfish. I was stupid. I thought James could give me something you couldn't. But I see now that it was all a lie. He can't even take care of himself, let alone me or this baby. I yanked my leg away from her grasp, glaring down at her. And you expect me to pick up the pieces? To save you from the mess you made? She nodded desperately. Yes, because I know you're a good man. Deep down, I know you still care. Her words were like poison. I knelt down to her level, locking eyes with her. You don't get to use my kindness against me anymore, Sarah. You used me. You lied to me. And now you're trying to manipulate me into saving you? Not a chance. I stood back up and turned my attention to James, who was avoiding my gaze. And you, I said, pointing a finger at him. You've been a parasite your entire life. I gave you every opportunity, every handout. And this is how you repay me? By taking what's mine and then throwing it in my face. I messed up, Michael. He mumbled, his voice barely audible. Messed up doesn't even begin to cover it, I snapped. You've destroyed every ounce of respect I ever had for you. And now, you're nothing to me. There was a heavy silence as my words hung in the air. Sarah sobbed quietly, still kneeling, while James stood frozen, his head bowed. I'll do anything, Sarah whispered, breaking the silence. Just please. I shook my head, a cold smile forming on my lips. Anything, I repeated. Then here's what you can do. Take your lover, take your lies, and take your misery, and get the hell off my property. I don't owe you a damn thing. James looked up, his face pale. You're really going to do this? Just leave us like this? You left me first, I said simply. Without another word, I stepped back inside and slammed the door in their faces. For hours, I sat by the window, watching as they lingered on the porch. Sarah eventually stood, leaning against James as the rain soaked them both. They whispered to each other, but their words were lost to the storm. When they finally walked away, their figures disappearing into the darkness, I felt a strange sense of relief. They had come to beg for mercy, but mercy wasn't something I could afford to give. Not to them. This was my closure, my line in the sand, and for the first time in months, I felt free. The days following Sarah and James's dramatic exit from my life were a blur of silence and clarity. For the first time in years, I had the space to think without the weight of lies and betrayal pressing down on me. But the road ahead wasn't simple. Rebuilding wasn't just about tearing them down, it was about finding myself again. One afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Ellis, a therapist I had reluctantly agreed to see. The room was warm but simple, her desk stacked with books and a small plant on the windowsill. She adjusted her glasses and looked at me with patient curiosity. So, Michael, she said, her tone even, where do you want to start? I hesitated. The words sat heavy in my throat, refusing to come out. Finally, I sighed. My wife cheated on me with my brother. My parents knew and supported them. And now, I've cut them all off. Dr. Ellis nodded. That's a lot of betrayal. How does that make you feel? How do you think it makes me feel? I snapped, then immediately regretted it. I took a deep breath. Sorry. It makes me feel like an idiot. Like I should have seen it coming. There's no way you could have predicted this, Michael, she said gently. Trust is built on the assumption that the people closest to us won't hurt us. Betrayal isn't your failure, it's theirs. Her words struck a chord. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I just don't know how to move forward, I admitted. You start small, she said. Rebuild your life one piece at a time. Figure out who you are outside of what's happened to you. I took her advice to heart. I started going for morning runs, something I hadn't done since college. The fresh air and rhythm of my footsteps became a strange kind of therapy. I focused on work, pouring my energy into projects I neglected during the chaos of my personal life. Then there was Genesis. We met at a coffee shop on a rainy morning. I had ducked inside to escape the downpour, and there she was struggling to juggle her umbrella, a stack of books, and a steaming cup of tea. Need a hand? I offered, stepping toward her. She looked up startled, then smiled. Thanks. I could use about 3. I helped her settle at a nearby table. And before I knew it, we were talking. Genesis was a freelance artist, working on illustrations for a children's book. Her laugh was warm, her eyes bright, and her presence oddly calming. Do you come here often? She asked as I stood to leave. Not really, I admitted. Just trying to escape the rain. Well, maybe you should, she said, scribbling something on a napkin and handing it to me. Her number. Over the next few weeks, Genesis became a constant in my life. We met for coffee, went for walks in the park, and talked about everything, our dreams, our failures, and the scars we both carried. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city, she turned to me with a curious expression. You're holding back, she said softly. I frowned. What do you mean? There's something you're not telling me. Something heavy. For a moment, I considered brushing it off, but there was something about her that made me want to be honest. My ex-wife cheated on me with my brother, I said finally. It's been a lot. Genesis didn't flinch or look away. Instead, she placed her hand over mine. I'm sorry, she said simply. That must have been incredibly painful. It was, I admitted, but I'm trying to move past it. I just don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again. Trust isn't about forgetting what happened, she said. It's about deciding who's worth the risk. Her words stayed with me long after that night. As weeks turned into months, my life began to take on a new shape. I started volunteering in a local shelter, something I'd always meant to do but never found the time for. The work was humbling and rewarding, giving me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Genesis and I grew closer, but I was careful not to rush things. She was patient, never pushing me beyond what I was ready for. One evening, as we cooked dinner together in my apartment, she suddenly paused, a thoughtful look on her face. Do you ever think about what you want next? She asked. I stirred the pasta, considering her question. I used to, I said, but after everything that's happened, I've been afraid to hope for too much. She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Maybe it's time to start hoping again. The turning point came during a charity gala for the shelter. I had been invited to speak about my experiences volunteering, and Genesis had offered to come with me. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, I realized how far I'd come. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild. I've learned that life doesn't always go the way we plan, I said, my voice steady. But it's in the aftermath of our struggles that we find who we truly are. We can choose to let pain define us, or we can use it to grow. When I stepped down, Genesis was waiting for me, her eyes shining with pride. You were amazing, she said, squeezing my hand. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost. And with Genesis by my side, I began to see a future that was brighter than I ever thought possible. Betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. In the end, it had given me the chance to start over, to build a life that was truly mine. Months had passed since I had last seen or thought about Sarah, James, or my parents in any meaningful way. My life was on a trajectory I could never have imagined back in those dark days of betrayal. Genesis and I were growing closer, and my days were filled with purpose and peace. But one crisp autumn morning, as I sorted through the mail, I found an envelope addressed to me in familiar handwriting. It was from Sarah. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether I even wanted to open it. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I sat down at the kitchen table, sliding my finger under the seal. The letter was lengthy, the ink smudged in places as if written through tears. Michael, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but please, I need you to listen. I need you to understand. I've lost everything. James has left me. He couldn't handle the stress and the mess we made of our lives. He walked out without even saying goodbye, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. I deserved it, I know I did. Your parents, they've disowned me too. After everything that happened, they blame me for their downfall, as if they weren't complicit in all of it. I'm broke, alone, and pregnant with a child I don't even know how to care for. I can't turn to anyone else. Please, Michael, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you for a chance to make amends. Please. Sarah, I set the letter down, my hands tightening into fists. The audacity of her plea was almost laughable. After all the destruction she and James had caused, she had the nerve to ask me for help? It felt like a final, desperate attempt to claw back some semblance of her old life, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate me again. But still, I couldn't help but wonder, was she truly remorseful, or was this just another act of desperation? That evening, as Genesis and I sat on the couch watching a documentary, I brought up the letter. I got something from Sarah today, I said. Genesis turned to me, her expression curious but not surprised. Oh, what did she want? She's begging for forgiveness, I said, handing her the letter. Apparently, James walked out on her, and my parents have cut her off too. She's alone, broke and pregnant. Genesis read the letter silently, her brow furrowing as she took in each word. When she finished, she set it down and met my gaze. What do you think? She asked. I shrugged. I don't know. Part of me feels like I should just ignore it. Another part wonders if I should confront her, get some closure. Genesis reached for my hand. Whatever you decide, just remember, you don't owe her anything. Closure doesn't have to come from her. It can come from letting go. That night, as I lay in bed, her words echoed in my mind. Letting go. It sounded so simple, yet it was the hardest thing I'd ever tried to do. The next morning, I made my decision. I took the letter, crumpled it into a ball, and carried it out to the fire pit in my backyard. I lit a match and watched as the flames consumed the paper, turning Sarah's words into ash. The weight that had clung to me for months seemed to lift with the smoke. A few weeks later, life threw one last curveball. I was leaving the grocery store when I saw her, Sarah. She was sitting on a bench outside, her hands resting on her swollen belly. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes rumpled, and her face drawn with exhaustion. She spotted me before I could turn away. Michael, she called, her voice weak and hoarse. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to walk away, but something made me stop. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, my tone cold but controlled. Her eyes filled with tears. I wanted to see you, to apologize, to say I'm sorry face to face. I crossed my arms, keeping a safe distance. Sorry for what? For cheating on me? For betraying me with my brother? For dragging my family into it? Or for thinking you could come crawling back when it all fell apart? She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. For all of it, she whispered. I was selfish, and I ruined everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know how much I regret it. I studied her for a moment, searching for any hint of manipulation or deceit. But all I saw was a broken woman, a shadow of the person she used to be. You regret it because you lost, I said finally. Not because you're sorry for what you did to me. She shook her head. No, that's not true. I regret hurting you more than anything. I sighed, my anger slowly giving way to indifference. Sarah, I've moved on. I have someone in my life now who actually cares about me, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else drag me back into the past. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded. I understand. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there alone. That evening, as I recounted the encounter to Genesis, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she placed her hand on mine. You did the right thing, she said softly. I hope so, I replied. As the months turned into years, Sarah and James became little more than distant memories. I never heard from James again, and I assumed he had moved on to wreck someone else's life. As for Sarah, I heard through the grapevine that she eventually gave birth and was struggling to raise the child on her own. But their suffering was no longer my concern. My focus was on my future, with Genesis by my side, a career that fulfilled me, and a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free,